What up, y'all? Welcome back. This is Jeff. In this video, we're going to talk about reading systems. I believe that education is freedom. Like Frederick Douglass has been quoted as saying, once you know how to read, you will always be free. In my work as a learner and an educator, I like to challenge myself, my students, and folks in my community to develop reading habits so that we read every single day of our life. I like to say to myself and to my students that once we know how to read, we can liberate our own mind, we can learn how to make money and make a life for ourselves, and we can learn how to build the future that we want to live in. I feel so strongly that the better readers we are, the more power we have. The other thing I feel really strongly about is that our education system is not really designed to support deep thinking and critical reflection because it's captured by moneyed interests. I have a lot to say about how business owners and politicians and folks in power work, I believe, actually against the public interest in educating our youth. This shows up as high student-to-teacher ratios. It shows up to underfunding in schools. It shows up to lower tax burdens for those with a lot of money. And so what that means is that the burden of liberation, the burden of education, is often placed on the students themselves rather than the system. So in my work with college students, one of the things I think a lot about is how to empower those students to create the life that they love. And I say a lot that if all you're doing is showing up to classes and following directions and getting grades, that is not a recipe for self-determination and the future that you want. That is a recipe for compliance and control. And so one of the things that I like to coach my students to do is to break out of that habit and to build other types of reading systems so that they can get information relevant to the future they want to build that's not given in many classes. One thing that I also believe really strongly as an educator is that I have to practice what I preach. It's not enough to give advice. That advice better be time-tested, research-based, and actually useful for students. So what I'm about to show you comes from probably 20 years of practice as a reader. I'm an avid reader in my own life. I think about reading every single day of my life. I have a lot to say about my own reading systems, and I'm going to show some of that to demonstrate what I'm talking about. But I also like to say that you are smarter than I am. You are more powerful than I am. You are stronger than I am. What I have on most of my students is that I'm balder than they are. In other words, I have experiences that they can learn from and steal so that they can propel themselves. You can propel yourself much faster than I did. So without further ado, let's go ahead and look at some reading systems that I've developed, and hopefully you get some ideas to help you read more, enjoy more, and really liberate your mind from this kind of oppressive education system that we have. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go to any browser, and then let's go to my homepage, appliedlinearalgebra.com. I'll go ahead and drop that link in the description here. In fact, we'll go right to my reading list. So if you, on the bottom here, this is my website. If you scroll all the way down to my reading lists, you're going to see some of the work that I do reading every year. Right now on my 2022, I'm on about 22 books. I haven't tracked everything that I've read in terms of books. I hope to get to 24 by the end of this year. And then also up here, there's this thing called Deep Reading System. So if you right-click this and open it, this will get you to a blog post that I wrote about 2 years ago called What is Deep Reading? I will also link both of these down in the description. So I'll link my current reading list and What is Deep Reading in the description to this video. So the major point of this blog post that I'm trying to make is that the word reading is really not a clear word. It's like the word exercise in English. So I always ask my students, if I say that I exercised today, do you have any idea of what I actually did? And the answer back is no, not really, just that you were like moving your body. And the same thing, I like to say the same thing about reading. If I said that I read today, it is actually not very clear. There's a bunch of different things happening inside of our brain when we read. But the English language only has one verb for that, which is to read. So one thing that I've thought a lot about over the years that I've tried to develop myself as a reader is how can I be more descriptive about what's happening in my brain when I read? The word exercise has tens, maybe hundreds of different words to describe different types of exercises. You could be swimming, you could be jogging, you could be sprinting, you could be walking, you could be throwing, jumping, skipping. I mean, just think about the number of activities that we can describe with different verbs. And I think part of that is because the human eye can see differences in exercises, but we can't see differences in reading. Reading is a mental internal thing. So when I develop reading system, one of the first things that I do is redefine reading. Most folks think about reading as accessing written text, but that's not how I think about it. I think about reading as accessing information from memory or from a data storage mechanism. So one of the reasons that books are so widely associated with reading is because, for the majority of human history, this was really the only mechanism by which we could easily store information for future reference that would cross time and space, right? So the words of an author could be written in one time, transcribed into a book, sent across space and time, and be accessed by somebody in other spaces and times. But now in current day, we actually have a bunch of data transmission technology. This includes audio, it includes visuals, it includes computer files, etc., which means that anytime that I'm accessing those, I define that as reading. This automatically means when I'm watching a Netflix video, that's reading because I'm reading that video from memory. And it also means that when I'm listening to podcasts, I'm reading, and when I'm reading books, I'm reading. The challenge, though, is that not all reading is designed to do all things. So when I'm watching a Netflix movie, I often call that entertainment reading because the goal of the reading is to be entertained. When I'm listening to podcasts, I usually call that either exploratory or information collection reading. You can read this blog post. It has a lot of, so I have 6 different types of reading. Type 1 is transactional reading, stuff that I do to complete a transaction. An example of this would be like driving down the highway when I see the street signs. That's transaction reading. I'm just wondering, do I need to turn here or not? I don't memorize it. I don't meditate on it. I literally just figure out where I'm going and then I'm done with it. Another one is entertainment reading. I do this for fun. Information collection reading. This is the stuff that I do in the newspaper and podcasts and just to stay aware of what's going on around me. The 3 types of reading that I want to talk about in this video are the types that actually changed my life. These are exploratory reading, filter reading, and deep reading. And I want to show the different types of reading that I do and systems that I use. So let's start with the lowest level. So one thing that I'll say is when you're looking at this list, most of the stuff that I've tracked so far is exploratory reading. I haven't done a really great job in my reading list of tracking filter and deep reading, but that's going to change moving forward. So as I continue to build out my reading systems, which I work on every single year, I'll start to more closely track which of these is exploratory reading, which of these are filter reading, which of these is deep reading, just to give viewers and lookers, onlookers. I do most of this for my students to empower them and to show them what's possible. So that you all can get a sense of what type of reading is he doing and how does he do that reading. So what I want to start with in this moment is a little bit about my exploratory reading systems, and to do that I'm actually going to build out what I currently do and describe how that's different. So exploratory reading I defined as any reading that I am doing just to explore a topic. I usually don't exploratory read books that I'm not interested in to begin with. So it's very, very seldom at this point in my career that I exploratory read a book that I don't know about. Let's go ahead and take a look at how I exploratory read. The way that I do this currently, there's my beautiful wife. She is my queen and my dream come true, is that I use Audible. So for many years, I didn't pay for this. Now I do because I have 2 young kids and I'm a very busy man. And it's easier to do this. So the way that I do this is I pay, I think, $15 a month to get 1 credit. I use way more than 1 credit a month, and Audible has kind of a deal that I think you can get 3 credits for like $30 or something like that. And so what I do is, as I decide on a book that I want to read, if it's available in audio format, I literally will just purchase that. I'll have my next book lined up as I start my new book, and then I'll just download and read. And I read these in a few different ways. One way is anytime I'm in the car alone commuting to and from work, I'm reading audiobooks, just period. The same thing is true when I'm doing yard work or when I'm doing dishes late at night and I'm very tired. Sometimes after my kids go to bed, I clean the house because it's kind of the easiest way to do that. And I'm really tired at that point, so I can't do real hard work in terms of mental activity. but I can pop in an audiobook and just listen to the ideas. And so the idea is that I can actually get a lot of reading done on a day-to-day basis in my quote-unquote free time. And when I'm exploratory reading, my goal is not to memorize the book. My goal is not to really meditate deeply on what's happening. All I'm trying to answer is, what is this book about? What ideas are in the book, and do I like what I see? I should say now that as a younger man, I would never have paid for this. I do now because I have a full-time job and I'm able to, I dedicate about $400, $500 a month to my own education over a year. I feel really, really strongly that one of the best things I can do for myself is to continue to grow as a professional. And so I just have a budget set aside for books like you see behind me and books like you see on this thing, and I use that budget. This is a mechanism by which I continue to grow in my career and to develop career capital, as Cal Newport would say. So that's now, but when I was a younger man, I didn't have that money to spend. And I have to be honest with you and say that this habit that I'm showing you, actually I developed when I had no money to spend on books. And the way that I would do this is that I would just use my local library. So over here, I'm already signed in. You'll see that when I go to my library account, so what I would do is okay, so I'm not signed in. Let me just go ahead and sign in. I'll go ahead and make sure you don't see my numbers here by blurring these out. So I would go to my local library library system and get my card, right? So this was when we lived in Redwood City. We've moved away from Redwood City, but I use this every single day. Notice that my card needs to be renewed because I haven't been to the library for a bit. So over here, what I would do, let's say that I wanted to find a book. So Deep Work was a book that I read for free at one time. So I would type in Deep Work up here. That's the search bar. And then the Redwood City Library would show me the type of books that it has: book, ebook, downloadable audiobook, and audio CD. I used to have a CD player in my car. You remember those things? I do. And so if I wanted to read it via CD, I would just kind of do this. It looks like it is available right now, which is really nice. So if I place a hold on this sucker, the library will actually take it off the shelf, put it in the front of the library, and then send me an email once it's there. And then I can go to the library, walk in, go to the place where these hold books are, and it'll have my name on it, and I can just pick it up. The same thing is true, that's kind of hard because I actually have to show up, but I always like to do that anyways because the library is such a cool place to be. There's also downloadable audiobooks, which is really cool. So if you ever see this thing, you can actually, it looks like all 22 holds. This is a very popular book on 5 copies. So if I place a hold on this, it will tell me when, we could actually do this right now. So now I've placed a hold, it will be emailed to this thing. I can place it and then I can download it. And what's nice about that is if I track my work, so if we go back to my reading list, down at the bottom here, I have a queue. So this is a system that I've built. I just kind of put the names of books, this is my reading queue that I want to read in the future. And if I have a sense of what books I want to do, I can go in batch mode and request those. I can find which ones are audiobooks, which ones are ebooks, etc. And literally download them to my thing for free. I can listen to them at any time. I usually listen to about 1.3 speed. I've tried a bunch of different speeds. 1 is too slow for sure. 2 is too fast. 1.5 is a little bit too fast for most readers. There are some readers that read a little bit slower. But the point is that I can get a lot of work done for free just by doing this. I wanted to show you a man that I'm working with and very deeply respect. His name is Eli Moore. Some people call him Eli Moore. He's a PhD candidate up at UC Davis, and I'll go ahead and put his website in the description of this. And I wanted to show that his reading list. One of the things I love about Eli is that he's such a deep thinker and he does a lot of reading. So I'll put his reading list in this thing. This is another habit that I think if you're interested in reading that is really powerful. Create a reading list where you track your work. We'll talk about that later in this video as we continue to do this. I wanted to show you though that this guy has read, I don't know, like we could count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Oh, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 books this year. And I think most of these he's read for free using his local libraries and the systems that we were just showing. He also has a queue queued up. And and then books that he read previously. And the point of this is that all of this is done for free. I think that's true. So based on what I remember about what we've talked about, many of the books that you see prior to 2019, all of these books I read for free. So those are how I get access to books for exploratory reading. There's also types of exploratory reading that I do on my Kindle. So again, because I'm a busy man, I don't use the library as much as I could, but that's just because like dealing with that takes a lot of energy compared to just like clicking. So on my Kindle, some books are not available on an audiobook but are available on Kindle. And so what I'll do in that situation is I'll just walk, like this was an example, Flow was a really good one. I'll highlight and have some fun with this. Yeah, but like sometimes when I'm at the store waiting in line, or at night when I'm tired but don't want to watch TV, I can get a lot of stuff done this way. And libraries also have books, ebook stuff that you can read. So the point is, getting access to books is not as hard as it would seem. It just takes a little bit of thought on the front end. But with that mechanism in mind, it means that I can read really voraciously. And in exploratory reading, my goal is never that my life is going to be changed in massive ways. My goal is only, let me get a sense of what this book is about and how this book works. So it's my first level. The way I joke about this with my students is, would you ever offer somebody to get married, like ask them to marry you without knowing them? And most of my students laugh and say, hell no. And then I say, okay, well, let's imagine that you were in the market to get married. What are the first things that you would do? And students come back and will be like, well, I'd probably go on some dates first, right? When I sit down to do deep reading, you're going to see this in a bit. Deep reading is reading that results in major life changes. So after I deep read a book, my life is very different than when I begin that process. It's a creative process. It's very intense. I can spend anywhere from like 2 months to 4 years or 5 years deep reading a book. And that's a large commitment. It's like marriage in that way, that it's a super large commitment of time and energy. And I'm not willing to deep read a book that I don't know a lot about. So I have actually 2 steps prior to deep reading that I use. I call those exploratory reading is my first step. That's like a first date. So when I exploratory read a book, it is equivalent to going to Starbucks with somebody for like a few weeks just to get to know them. I buy them a drink, nothing too expensive. I ask them a few questions. And if at the end of those first few dates that I'm feeling like I kind of like this person, I want to spend more, then I'm going to go up to filter reading. And filter reading is when we go out for a little bit longer dates. Maybe they start to meet my friends. Maybe they start to meet my family. So I actually want to show you how this process works and then what it looks like. Let's start with a book that I filter read. I did this exploratory reading, filter reading, and deep reading recently. So that book is called UNgrading. So here's the actual text. It's kind of hard to see. It's very bright in here. This is by a woman named Susan Blum. She's the editor of this book, UNgrading, Why Rating Students Undermines Learning. It's something that I feel very passionate about. So the way that I did this was let's turn that down just a little bit. Does that help a little bit? No, not really. Let's see if we turn it off, what happens. Okay, so anyways, in UNgrading, what I did first was I downloaded it on Audible. I read the whole thing. I think I read it in about a week and a half. I kind of forget at this moment. The nice thing is you can check this for yourself. So if we go to my reading list and go UNgrading, so it looks like I read this over about a 3-week period on my commutes to and from work and while I was doing dishes and stuff like this. Once I was done with this, I realized probably about 4 chapters in that I was going to want to go deeper with this book. So I actually purchased it and had it sent to my house. And that's where I had this thing. And then once I was done, I started the filter reading process. So in the filter reading process, let me see if I can get this lighting system worked out here for you. It's a little bit bright today. Yeah, that's a little bit better. So once I finished the exploratory reading process, I moved on to another exploratory reading. But then I found time in my life, sometimes when my kids and I were watching a movie that was interesting but not like super fun late at night, I would just get this out and I would filter it. So the goal of exploratory reading is answering the question, what is this book about and do I want to spend more time with it? The goal of filter reading is my second read now, is to read through the book and to filter it into 2 different types of information, one of which I call substance and the other I call fluff. So if you've ever been reading and you recognize that some of the author's words were not very valuable for you, it's kind of fluffy stuff, and that other words really resonated deeply with you and you thought there was a lot of substance there was stuff that you wanted to return to, that's the process of filter reading. Let me take the entire book and partition it into two types of information: substance, stuff that I think will change my life, and fluff, stuff that I don't really need to return to. So my second read through, what I do is I work through every single page again, and I literally mark up the book. So I take up, I've been, one of my teachers used to get mad at me because he was old school Russian, and he used to get really, really mad that I wrote in my books. But I'm not old school Russian. I wasn't born in the Depression days, and I actually love writing all over my books. So I can tell you that on this page, there's only a few ideas that I want to return to as time goes on, and I know that because they're highlighted. They're literally circled there, right? And if you flip through this book, I've reread the book a second time, and literally what I did is I highlighted all the stuff by circling it in pen. I mark it up, I return to the ideas, I put notes in the margin, etc. So by the second read of this book, I've got a really good sense of what I think is valuable and how that's going to change my life in the future. And by the end of my filter reading, I'm usually down for deep reading. So I am currently still in the middle of deep reading this book. I think I finished my filter read sometime last year. We can kind of see this. Let's go back to that list. So this was done in 2021. So it's been about a year. I imagine I'm going to need and my filter read was probably done by the end of January of this year. I didn't track it because I'm still developing systems to track when I do filter reading and deep reading, but I imagine I was done with my filter reading of this by probably January 2022. And then what's cool about this is we can actually get a sense of what deep reading means. So I call deep reading a process by which I create an entire new version of the book customized to my own writing. So by the end of a deep read, I expect my life to be physically different. I expect that I have evidence that I've made changes in my life. And you can kind of see this on my JAM blog post. So over here on my website, appliedlinearalgebra.com, if you go to Jeff Anderson's math blog posts, many of these come from deep reading. So if you go down to Jeff Anderson's ungrading projects, I'll link that in the description. This is actually my process of deep reading this book. There are a number of things that I'm doing to change the way that I teach. So I've created a course website fax, an attendance fax, a flipped classroom fax. I have some other stuff that I'm still writing. I've got Conquering College Lab 1, Conquering College Lab 2. I just this quarter finished Conquering College Lab 3. I'm going to have a bunch of videos and posts and resources to help students fully thrive in an ungraded classroom. So the major idea of an ungraded classroom is that I am not going to oppress my students by telling them what they need to do to learn. It happens that doing ungrading is way harder than grading, because in grading I can use punishment and domination to basically force my students to do things that I want them to do. But when I ungrade, it requires a much, much higher level of guidance and support and thinking and really relationship building with my students. And so what you're seeing is that I am slowly building the infrastructure to ungrade my classes, and I call this deep reading. So the reason that I'm making these changes is that by reading this book, I'm currently in the middle of another book associated with the same project, which is Punished by Rewards. I've got another 4 titles that I'm not showing you right now that I'm also in the middle of filter reading and deep reading for. And what I do is, as I filter and deep read, I incorporate ideas into projects that I actually build that will change the way that I run my life and the habits that I use to engage with students and the structures that I use in my class. And notice the whole idea of deep reading is that at the end of that process, what I do on a daily basis is different. So I want evidence to show that what I'm doing after I read is different than what I do before I read, which is why when you look at this post, this is a slow process. It requires, hours and hours and hours of work per project. And that's also why I don't jump into deep reading. Every deep reading project lasts many months to years. And so when I exploratory read and filter read, it allows me to work up to the place where I'm creating that. So that's one example of those systems in action. I wanted to show some other examples too, because not all people resonate deeply with the process of reading about grading, because not all people are teachers. This is one that this is a deep reading project that I did in 2009, probably December 2009 to January 2010. It was a second year of my PhD program in the winter quarter. So one of the major goals that I had for myself in my PhD project was that I was going to develop a very deeply ingrained and a purposeful vision for my career. And to do that, I wanted to collect more information. So this is something that I deep read during my winter break. I think I spent about 2 hours or 3 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week over break doing this. This was an old binder that I used to use. I have a lot to say. I'll link to a previous video where I talk about my dream binder. These are early versions of the professional vision statement that I used to use and personal vision statement. I actually have an early version of the calendars that I used to use with the post-it note system. So this is an example of some mistakes that I made. Here I've hardwired my academic calendar, and when things change, I've got to redo this entire thing. So I started to develop the post-it note thing here. It's not fully there. I have a color code for my different projects that I was working on. What I want to show you here, though, here is a deep read of the book, The Powerful Engagement by Tony Schwartz and Jim Loehr. And in this deep read, I literally rewrote the entire book by hand, but I customize it to my own work. So we can kind of just flip through this. This is literally everything in this book rewritten in my own handwriting with diagrams and highlighting and customization. And then I'm also adding notes. So there's a bunch of notes in this about what I think about the work, about ideas that I want to work on. And while I was reading this, I was also developing my personal vision statement and my professional vision statement to make a connection between what I was reading and how I think about my life and my work. And you can imagine how much time this takes, right? Like, this is a huge commitment. This is a very, very large commitment of my time and energy to be able to really translate this book into my own principles. That's what I'm doing here. I'm rewriting the book for myself and customizing all the ideas into my own systems. So, another artifact that came out of this is kind of fun. I was looking at this. One thing that I thought a lot about was developing habits to make life easier. So as I was reading this book, I created some morning ritual habits and some break habits and some other stuff that made life a little bit easier and allowed me to stay engaged longer at work. To be honest with you, as I've been preparing for this video, I've wanted to redo this. I've been thinking a lot about this idea of figuring out what I do during my breaks recently. But the point is, you kind of see that deep reading requires a lot more thought than just a standard thing. I can tell you that in this process, I did exploratory reading. I read the audiobook of this first. By the end of the audiobook, I realized that this book was going to be really powerful to me. So I skipped the filter reading and I jumped right into the deep reading and did the entire thing, right? So you can actually see where this ends. I mean, it just keeps going, right? This is the entire book rewritten for myself and customized. Yeah, so there's the end of that book. And by the end of this, I had a vision statement. I had a sense of what I wanted to do for the next few years. I had started to develop a really good sense of the work that I wanted to do in grad school and beyond. So that's that project. I want to show you two other projects to show you what deep reading means and make the connections between deep reading and filter reading. So this is at one point I was learning how to do, I wanted to do a RFID version, radio frequency identification version of an attendance system. And to do that, I was going to do it in Excel using Visual Basic, which is the programming languages behind this. So I signed up for a lynda.com course on Visual Basic. I also bought myself a Visual Basic book. And then I just literally rewrote the entire course for myself. And in this case, I would take screenshots of all the stuff that would be done on screen and then highlight those things to kind of show what different steps I would need to use. And then I would highlight and track all the stuff that I would need to do to be able to create a Visual Basic script that would run on any computer that uses this, different symbols, etc. And the whole point of this is, anytime I was thinking then, just like I think now, anytime I need to use this material in the future, I can go back to my own notes rather than a textbook. So I can tell you that this has way more information in it than either the lynda.com or the textbook, and it's customized to my own computer since the screenshots show up in this, right? And so the point of this is, as I was deep reading, I was creating a resource that would change my life. In this case, it is a record of all the work that I was doing to create the specific resources that I was going to use in my classes, right? And so you can kind of like, this is a commitment for sure. It's a fun project. It allows me to go pretty deep. And that's the end of those particular notes. At this point, I was not breaking it into things. And this project only lasted about 2 months, whereas some of the other projects that you've seen were a little bit faster than this. And then the last deep reading example that I want to show is one from math. So this book is a pretty powerful book in linear algebra. This is my mathematical expertise. One of the habits that I developed as a mathematician was to solve every single problem in a book. So there's a great book down here for those of you that ever have to take an algebra class. The book Dumb It in Foot is by far my favorite abstract algebra book. This book I rewrote completely in my own handwriting, and I solved every single problem at the back of the book from chapters 1 through 12. I didn't get to the end of it, but at one point I had probably over 2,000 pages of handwritten notes. At that point I was still a young person and I didn't track all my work, so it ended up that like if I needed to look at those notes now, it wouldn't make any sense because I wasn't thoughtful about that. But I learned a lot from that ultra learning project. I just learned recently what ultra learning means by Scott Young. I had been doing ultra learning projects for years and years and years before Scott Young coined that term. The whole point of it is to create really strong bouts of learning that you track over time. And in this one of the things that I learned is spend the extra few minutes per problem, per note to make them referenceable. So here's an example of that. In this book, I got a lot out of this book, and so one of the goals that I had is to solve every single problem in the back of the book. I'm still working on this. I haven't actively worked on this project for about 8 years, 10 years. No. 2011 through 2013 is when I really was doing this in my free time. So to do this, what I do is I just read this book, I recreate the lesson notes, the lecture notes, so I rewrite all his stuff at a very deep level, and then I actually just like track it. There's a great document that I made in my Conquering College stuff. I'll link that in this particular timestamp. It's how to do suggested problems. One of the suggestions that I have is to write the exercises and then write the solution in full. So these are full solutions. Problem 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, it doesn't look like I have, so I can go back and look at that. 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, right? And then we go on to chapter 3, all governed by chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, right? And so what's really cool about this is, one, the deep reading process involves solving problems and tracking those. And one of the things that I like to say when I track my solutions is to make it easy for my future self to understand. So when I'm writing these, I'm not writing them to get the answer. I'm writing them so 10 years from now, when I look back at this, I will fully understand all the work that I did, right? And so that's a process. By the time I finish that deep reading thing, I will have really understood all of the material in this book at a very deep level, and I'll have a second brain, an external memory bank, so that I don't have to remember that stuff. Anytime I forget, I can just go back to my own systems and look at that work, right? And I can tell you that in the development of my PhD thesis expertise, this process, I did this with this and about 6 other linear algebra books, that's my main breadwinner, was a really, really powerful way to develop expertise. So, with that, I think I'm gonna stop this video. The invitation here is for each of you. This is really, I talk a lot about this with my students, but my students are encouraging me to develop my YouTube presence as a way to empower other people who aren't in my class, and I really appreciate that. I encourage, I recommend, I want to inspire you to develop your own reading habits. You know how to read. You will never be beholden to authority figures. You will be able to develop your own expertise and your own ideas and your own visions for the world, and then you can go get trained on whatever it is that you need to learn. I'm not going to say that teachers become obsolete, because you can use teachers to navigate our system, and you can use mentors and people that you know to put yourself into advantage positions. But I do want to say that this is a mechanism by which you can enjoy self-determination, self-actualization. And then recently I read the book, Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, he talks a lot about self-transcendence, the idea that as we develop our skills and our career capital, that we don't only focus on enriching and empowering ourselves, that we develop a purpose for our life in which we invest in and support other people in our communities. I have a very strong vision that most of our efforts should go to empower people who have systemically less power than we do, particularly are often oppressed and ignored by our societies. And so that's the self-transcendence piece. But the point is that we can use reading and development of reading systems to empower ourselves. So the thing that I hope that you take away from this is an invitation to think really critically about, one, what is your definition of learning, right? Community challenge. How do you define reading, right? That's what I meant to say. How do you define reading? 2, what are the different types of reading that you do on a daily basis? 3, how can you make reading fun for yourself? How can you take ownership back of reading? One of the things that I hope that you see is that I take a lot of pride in this. This is something that I look forward to. My wife always makes fun of me we went to Barcelona for our honeymoon, and no joke, on the 12-hour flight, I did my 3rd reading of this book. It's called How Learning Works by Susan Ambrose et al. And I had been making flashcards to memorize the definition of learning. I had been writing the seeds of blog posts. I had been doing, like, on our flight, right? And she was joking. She's like, do you ever turn off? And I was like, baby, this is as exciting, if not more exciting to me than any movie that I can ever read. And God bless her, she hasn't left me yet. I hope I can earn my life and my love with her every day that I live with her, because she is my dream come true. So last community challenge problem is, how do you develop systems that allow you to read broadly and deeply on a daily basis? How many books can you read every single day of your life, right? How many books can you read a year? How? Why? So I'll stop there. Thanks for your attention, y'all, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.